Erupting onto the junior hockey scene with a blistering slap shot and an almost psychic feel for the puck, Bryan Charles Fogarty seemed destined for greatness the very moment he shattered the hallowed scoring record once held by Bobby Orr. Coaches, jaded by years of scouting and difficult to excite, suddenly found themselves whispering comparisons to Paul Coffey. Longtime fans who thought they had seen it all were rendered speechless by highlight reel rushes that looked ripped from a comic book. At ice level, you could hear gasps ripple through arenas whenever Fogarty touched the puck, because in an instant he might pivot, accelerate, shimmy past two defenders, and unleash a rising laser that was in the net before the goaltender finished blinking. It all felt surreal, as if the sport itself had birthed the cheat code in human form. Yet behind those electrifying moments, Fogarty wrestled with anxiety so sharp it felt like live wires inside his chest, and he reached for alcohol to smother the static. Day by day, that coping mechanism hardened into addiction, an invisible parasite that slowly chipped away at everything the hockey world believed it had found in this transformative defenseman. What follows is the unforgettable rise and heartbreaking fall of a Canadian phenom whose life remains a stark reminder of how quickly brilliance can wither under relentless pressure. To grasp how quickly his star ascended, travel back to the late 1980s and the buzzing barnyards that were Ontario Hockey League rinks. In those buildings, many of them humble concrete bowls dotted with wooden benches, Fogarty became less of a prospect and more of a force of nature. Scouts crisscrossed the province, clutching coffee-stained notebooks, determined not to miss a single moment of this kid's magic. During the 1988-89 season with the Niagara Falls Thunder, he incinerated score sheets, piling up a mind-bending 155 points in 60 games. 155. For context, most defensemen felt accomplished hitting 50. Even forwards with NHL dreams would kill for triple digits. Every weekend, Fogarty added 3 or 4 or 5 points as if it were routine housekeeping. He quarterbacked power plays with an elegance that bordered on showmanship. Head up, eyes scanning, stick cocked like a loaded spring at the blue line. When he wasn't threading seeing-eye passes through ankles, he was roaring end-to-end, hips swiveling around flat-footed defenders. Goalies dreaded his slap shot, a technically flawless motion that produced a puck traveling so fast it seemed to warp the arena air. The thunderclap off his composite stick became a calling card. Fans would flinch even before the puck connected with twine. Inside those locker rooms, teenage Bryan Fogarty felt the exhilarating glow of a sports fantasy made real. Teammates jostled his helmet, ruffled his hair, crowned him unstoppable around the Gatorade cooler. Reporters, often seasoned scribes seen it all cynical, lined up every night, thrusting tape recorders forward, peppering him with questions about surpassing legends. Under the bright bulbs of local TV studios, he answered with bashful smiles, a slight shrug, a deflecting, "aw shucks." He made it look effortless, and that effortlessness, ironically, sowed the first seeds of disquiet. Expectations soared, headlines ballooned. The more the outside world anointed him, the more the internal pressure meter spiked. And in hotel rooms after games, away from coaches and curfews, Fogarty discovered that beer numbed the buzzing tension in his mind. A couple turned into a handful casually slid toward a dozen. Soon the ritual of celebration blurred into the ritual of sedation. Still, when draft day 1987 arrived, nobody could deny his potential. The Quebec Nordiques, desperate to breathe new life into a floundering franchise, used the 9th overall pick to claim him, doubling down on belief by selecting him even before securing future Hall of Famer Joe Sakic. That move sent shockwaves through draft halls and living rooms. The Nordiques were betting that Fogarty's generational talent might anchor their blue line for a decade. Imagine the scene in Quebec City, fans chanting in French, waving banners, already picturing their fresh-faced savior unleashing bombs from the point while Sakic orchestrated offense up front. A rebuild suddenly felt plausible. But transitional turbulence always stalks teenage rookies, especially those carrying the weight of prophecy. Upon relocating to Quebec, Fogarty confronted a new culture, bilingual media scrutiny, and a locker room of veterans measuring the kid behind skeptical eyes. Away from the rink, the city's nightlife pulsed, pubs tucked into cobblestone streets, Late-night eateries, distractions on every corner. The same insecurity that once dissolved beneath OHL novel now collided with NHL intensity, and the old urge whispered in his ear, "Have a drink, smooth the edges." Early stories surfaced, a missed meeting here, a fuzzy morning skate there. Coaches took mental notes on his conditioning, quietly questioning whether the Golden Child had the engine for an 80-game grind. Meanwhile, the NHL game itself was a far cry from junior. This was the era of trench war in the corners, brawling heavyweights and punishing open ice hits that rattled dasher boards like cymbals. Fogarty's natural gifts still flashed. He'd lug the puck coast to coast. He'd rifle a slap shot past stunned goalies. But those sparks flickered between periods of inconsistency. Savvy veterans exploited defensive lapses, hacking his wrists, chirping about his off-ice habits, testing the armor of his confidence. Front office patience waned. Media narratives pivoted from future superstar to enigmatic prospect. Fans who had once cheered his highlights now grumbled when he lost net front battles or took ill-timed penalties. Yet, every so often, pure brilliance would resurface to remind everyone why they once believed. You might tune in on a random Tuesday, and there he'd be, number 16, slicing through neutral zone traffic like a marauder, then cannonading a shot so lethal the opposing goaltender looked shell-shocked. Those nights rekindled hope. Maybe, insiders mused, the switch is finally flipping. But addiction doesn't recognize personal bests. It doesn't pause for glimpses of excellence or hold respect for professional contracts. Fogarty's relationship with alcohol deepened in the margins between practices, where loneliness and anxiety thrived. His off-ice life became a spinning coin. Sometimes he stayed the course. Other times, he spiraled into late-night binges that left him hollow-eyed and dehydrated for morning skate. Coaches tried cajoling, then scolding. Teammates offered pep talks. The organization arranged counseling, but changing a habit rooted in fear proved Herculean. The label inconsistent began to orbit him like a stubborn satellite. Eventually, the Nordiques, strapped for patience, moved him. Trades can be second chances or fresh storms. For Fogarty, the new horizons, Pittsburgh, Montreal, a handful of other stops, came with renewed vows and brand new temptations. In each city, you could chart the same heartbreak pattern. He'd arrive brimming with promise. A coach would declare, "If we can harness his raw tools, watch out." Media outlets would run feel-good features about redemption. And at first, Fogarty delivered. For the Penguins, he'd thread no-look passes to Mario Lemieux during practice and leave reporters buzzing. In Montreal, holy ground for defensemen, he showcased glimpses of total dominance, elegant rushes, laser beam outlets, quarterbacking a power play as if born for the crest. Bell Center crowds rose to their feet when he wound up at the blue line. But after the curtain fell, the city's glittering nightlife beckoned. One bender, then another, then a missed team bus. Leadership groups held private meetings. General managers weighed upside versus liability. In a sport built on trust and routine, unpredictability breeds caution. Montreal cut ties. Another chapter closed with ellipses rather than an exclamation mark. By the mid-1990s, Fogarty's career resembled a patchwork quilt of minor league assignments and overseas contracts. Scouts, once desperate for front-row seats, now viewed him as a curiosity. Could that legendary shot still terrify goalies? Could fresh scenery fix fragile habits? Every New Jersey offered momentary hope. Coaches declared, "We'll straighten him out. We'll unlock that cannon." And sometimes they did, briefly. In a small town in Europe, fans would gasp as his slap shot exploded past bewildered netminders. Teammates would marvel. If he wanted, he could own this league. But mornings came, and with them came stories of bar tabs and missed buses. Eventually, even affable charm wore thin. Contracts got shorter, skepticism thicker. Fogarty carried his 4-inch thick stick bag through airports with a resigned shrug, wearing ball caps low to hide puffy eyes. He'd shake hands with new teammates, promise them things would be different this time, then feel the old anxiety coil tight. Pause and consider what that repetitive cycle does to a psyche already bruised. The very gift that once made him invincible now amplified the disappointment. If he had been a marginal skater, maybe nobody would care. But being the next Bobby Orr meant every stumble attracted double the scrutiny. Sports writers ran could-have-been columns. Talk radio callers debated whether teams owed him another chance or if he had squandered enough goodwill. In watering holes across minor league towns, old-timers shook their heads. Kid had it all. Could have owned the league. Fogarty himself, sober during fleeting intervals, likely replayed highlight tapes in hotel rooms, asking a mirror how the confident teenager of Niagara Falls had morphed into a journeyman. The natural question, the one that sits heavy on every observer's mind, is why no one successfully intervened. Where were the robust support systems? Why didn't an entire hockey apparatus with its trainers, counselors, and veteran mentors manage to salvage a figure so obviously worth saving? Part of the answer lies in the era's culture. Professional hockey in the 80s and 90s romanticized toughness, equating heavy drinking with bonding and resilience. Road trip bar crawls were rites of passage. Teams employed fewer mental health professionals. Player assistance programs existed mostly as phone numbers buried in binders. As long as a skater produced on game night, late-night antics were winked at or quietly fined away. Fogarty's on-ice ability often granted him additional lives, prolonging the cycle rather than breaking it. Another factor is deeply personal. Addictive personalities rarely yield to outside influence unless internal readiness collides with external resources. Fogarty, by many accounts, was shy, introverted, and ill-equipped to deflect the meteor shower of attention that followed record-shattering junior numbers. Alcohol quickly became a salve, first for nerves, then for emptiness, then for shame about leaning on it in the first place. Friends staged informal interventions. Coaches tried stern ultimatums. But the more pressure mounted, the more alluring that numbing blur felt. At a certain point, the conversation shifted from, "Can we fix him?" to, "How do we minimize collateral damage?" In a broader context, Fogarty's downfall exposes the cruel arithmetic of pro sports. Talent multiplied by opportunity equals potential, but subtract support and add addiction, and the sum can plummet to zero. Hockey culture loves origin myths, stories about kids rescuing franchises, about backyard rinks, and good Canadian boys who become household heroes. Those myths rarely account for mental health landmines. For every Wayne Gretzky who glides through decades under the spotlight, countless equally skilled peers buckle under burdens unseen. Fogarty's dazzling skill set magnified the heartbreak precisely because it was so obvious. It was as if you could touch destiny with your bare hands, only to watch it liquefy. The media, sensing both tragedy and clicks, chronicled each stumble with lurid fascination. Headlines screamed when Fogarty overslept practice or got traded. The narrative of a fallen prodigy sells as reliably as heroics. Fans who once taped newspaper clippings to the bedroom walls became numb to yet another misstep. Some still rooted for him. After all, redemption arcs are catnip to sports culture. But fatigue crept in. People muttered, "If he'd just get serious, he could be the second coming of Coffey." That phrase, repeated like a mantra, eventually turned accusatory. Maybe he never truly cared. Somewhere in the swirl of trades, one-year deals, and demotions to farm teams in cities nobody could pronounce, Bryan Fogarty's grand narrative unraveled, yet focusing solely on the downward spiral risks erasing the human being behind the cautionary tale. Teammates recall his kindness, a quiet word to an anxious rookie, a quick joke on the bench to cut tension. Equipment staff remember a player who said thank you earnestly, who stayed late after practice to help collect pucks. Scouts, even now, recount the thrill of witnessing a 17-year-old defenseman dangle through an entire lineup. In those fragile moments when Fogarty was sober and confidence surged, he radiated an almost childlike joy. Skates carving effortless arcs, stick tapping to demand the puck because he saw corridors nobody else could imagine. For that flash, the enormous weight lifted, and everything felt possible again. But reality always returned. By the late 90s, as younger prospects flooded the system and organizations grew wary of liabilities in the salary cap era, opportunities dried up. Fogarty bounced to smaller markets, semi-pro outfits, even pickup leagues just to keep skating. Each new uniform felt thinner than the last, as if symbolizing diminishing patience. He logged highway miles, cheap motel stays, and long nights staring at ceiling tiles, minds swirling with if-onlys. The body that once looked carved for highlight reels began to wear the signs of hard living. An extra few pounds here, lost explosiveness there. Scouts eventually crossed his name off depth charts entirely. And yet, when he stepped onto any sheet of ice, be it before 2,000 fans or 200, spectators could still sense a dormant supernova. All it took was one clean pass, one wind-up at the point, to reveal the shadow of what might have been. Those final echoes of brilliance intensify the sadness. Fogarty's legacy is not just talent squandered, it is